GW Pharmaceuticals run. Here's a speculative drug company that's been a real wild trader, but I wouldn't be surprised if today's 10% move higher is the arbinger of better things to come. For those of you who don't remember, GW Pharma is the one really legitimate play on medical marijuana. First of all, it's an actual drug company that uses marijuana derivatives to develop real medicine. Second, it's British, which means that unlike a U.S.-based company, it doesn't need to worry about laws that about making a large quantity of pot. Okay, that's a Class A felony in this country. In fact, GW Pharma already has one drug on the market, Sativex. That's a mouth spray for multiple sclerosis spasms, which it sells in about 25 countries like Canada, Germany, Spain, and of course the UK. It's currently studying the drug for cancer pain here in the United States. But the really exciting story, the really exciting part of the pipeline, is a phase 3 drug called Epidiolex for both treatment-resistant epilepsy and for an orphan drug called Dravet syndrome, which is a rare but severe form of pediatric epilepsy. Drug likely won't come up for the FDA approval until 2016, but if it can get approved, it's got potential to be a real blockbuster, billions in peak sales. Let's take a closer look with Justin Glover. He's the CEO of GW Pharmaceuticals. Learn more about his company and where it is headed. Mr. Glover, welcome to Mad Money. Great to have you on the show.
Jim, thank you for having me.
Have a seat. Thank you. All right, I have to admit, I came to your company through a traditional method. My doctor is a guy named Dr. Jonathan LaPook, and he is the CBS doctor in full disclosure, CNBC. And he said to me, listen, you've got to look into medical marijuana because the MS results could be spectacular. The epilepsy results could be spectacular. And people are not focused on it because if the American companies were to do what they're doing, it's conceivable that someone in Congress could call for their being investigated by justice. Is that an accurate depiction of what some people are thinking about your company?
Well, actually, the situation with respect to the legal system is no different in the UK. It's just that all the work we do, whether it's in Europe or in the US, comes under federal law. We're allowed to do legitimate scientific research into these kind of substances. And that's what we've been doing for the last 16 years. Obviously, the medical marijuana issue has brought our research to the fore. Right. But actually, we've been doing this in a serious scientific way for, as I say, 16 years. And it looks now as if our drugs are really starting to show promise with respect to the U.S. market.
Well, let's talk about that, because most traditional doctors I know are afraid to actually write a script for medical marijuana because it's different. Place to place is different. The FDA would never go for that. Why doesn't, if things are so great for you guys, why isn't a Pfizer or Bristol Myers doing exactly what you're doing?
But that's why we exist. The dilemma that the physician and patients face is that the option that's available right now in certain states doesn't allow for a controlled source with the safeguards that an FDA approval provide. That's the role GW can play. We have the opportunity to develop medicines, real medicines, with FDA approval that are prescribed, reimbursed, and that patients can trust that we know exactly what's in it and we know what these medicines do, their safety profile, and so on. And I think this is a real opportunity. GW sits in a very unique space within the pharmaceutical
industry.
I
agree. I know I was surprised when the American Academy of Neurology said that medical marijuana is the right thing. This week, from the 5th to the 9th, the American Epilepsy Conference is happening in Seattle. A lot of people are saying, Cramer, the stock was up 10% today because of you. Is it possible that you might have some breakthrough things that are going to be announced at that conference?
There are a lot of new information events around the American Epilepsy Society. I would say that the data coming out there is subsets of data which has already been seen by investors.
Okay.
But there is more color around that meeting. There is more interest in that meeting. And I think the excitement around Epidiolex at that meeting is undoubtedly something which will be important for our company, not just this year, of course, but going into medical meetings next year as well.
Right. Now, let's talk about the non-orphan uses, and you got a great presentation. Type 2 diabetes. I got 29 million people that might have that. Possible?
Yes, and it's a good example of the complexity of what we're dealing with here, because when we talk about medical marijuana, the assumption is we're talking about one thing.
Right.
But actually what we're talking about are different molecules in the marijuana plant that may do very different things. So the drug that we're testing to treat epilepsy is a different drug from the one that we're testing to treat diabetes, albeit they all come from this very interesting plant.
And is schizophrenia still another version of that?
Exactly. Schizophrenia, we have multiple sclerosis, you mentioned in introduction, cancer, pain,
colitis,
inflammatory bowel conditions. we have anti-cancer trials going on as well. We do believe that, if we keep going, we've got a few decades worth of work here to be able to bring what we call cannabinoid medicines to patients across a whole range of disease areas.
When you speak with doctors offline, aren't they all saying the same thing, which is and I've dealt with some of the great hospital complexes in New York and Philadelphia, that if they only had this, if they could just start giving this to people rather than OxyContin, rather than just watch them be in pain, it's a natural. But what is the real problem with not just having this stuff right now for compassionate use for people who are dying?
Because you've got to do the research. We just don't know enough, and a physician rightly will say, you've got to have the data to tell me, the prescriber, what I should be treating with, who I should be treating.
But you agree with me, this is a compassionate use drug for all those different people.
Well, they're different drugs, but if you take epilepsy as the good example, a year ago, we were in exactly that situation. We had doctors who really wanted to try and use this drug on a compassionate basis. Today, 200 children in America are taking this drug on a compassionate basis. That number will be 400 in a few months from now. So that is happening, but it doesn't negate the need for the real research. And hopefully, if we keep the research going, that drug Epidiolex you mentioned for epilepsy will be with FDA and hopefully will be approved in the not too distant future.
Okay, well, this is if all these things do turn out, the stock is radically undervalued, and obviously if they don't, then people will say, wow, that was a nice try. But I only put that because it is a speculative situation. Speculative situation. Stay with Cramer.